All right. So does that look like it's recording there?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, great to see everyone this morning. Happy Tuesday. I guess morning for most on the West Coast and Midwest, but already lunchtime back east. So great to see each of you. And for those who haven't met, I'm Shane Jimerson. And we've also got a few colleagues who are helping. Our SPR social media team is here with us, including Kirby Wyckoff and Jamie Flowers. I believe that Ryan Farmer will also be joining in. So if you have comments, questions, feel free to enter in information in the chat, and we'll pick up on that. We'll pause occasionally so that we can address some of those questions and such. And I see that 71 of 77 have completed the polling already for this morning, as we'll shortly get launching with the pro tips for preparing constructive, high quality, and timely peer reviews. And hopefully some of you who have come in so far are seeing the social media. If you're not yet actively engaged with the SPR social media on Twitter or Facebook, I encourage you to check out those handles there where you can follow and get information regularly. So again, Kirby, Jamie, Ryan have all been providing tremendous leadership infrastructure and support to get our school psych review social media launched. And we'll be doing some of these Zoom sessions on various topics. We'll be featuring sessions, for instance, on peer reviews, submitting manuscripts, featuring special topic sections that are forthcoming with guest editors and such. So hopefully all of that will be of interest and keep you engaged, and welcome your participation and contributions throughout. So folks wanted a quick update on the poll. I can let you know, let's see, I can end the poll and then I can share the results. So if you want to see, you can see that there's about 50% graduate students, about 40% faculty members, 12% practitioners, 5% other. In terms of how many years you've been reviewing journal articles, just to get a sense of who's on board here, about half are just beginning, so 0. There's 3 to 5 articles that they've reviewed at 16%, 6 to 10, 14%, 11 to 15, 4, and then 16 to 23%. So you kind of get a sense about half of the folks are new to reviewing. That's excellent and welcome. And so how comfortable do you feel with your current level of preparation to peer review manuscripts? About 18% very comfortable, 27% somewhat comfortable, 26% neutral, and then we got about a quarter that are somewhat uncomfortable. So we see that kind of spread. Very uncomfortable, maybe just a couple. Hopefully by the end of our discussion today, we'll at least get you somewhat uncomfortable versus very uncomfortable. And then, are you currently a member of the Journal Editorial Board? You can see that we've got some of our members from the SPR leadership team I'll introduce in just a moment, as well as the SPR Editorial Advisory Board. Great to see you folks. And as encouraged, many student editorial board members. So welcome to all. There's a few folks that also review for other journals. And we've got about 15 who are not presently serving on a journal editorial board, but perhaps you'll follow up and email me and express an interest in serving as an ad hoc reviewer and or getting involved with the SPR editorial board. Okay, so that's the brief update and information, and I'll be able to pop in with some other polls as we go through today. But now that everybody should be on board for the most part, we can go ahead and dive in. Welcome again to the pro tips for preparing constructive, high quality, and timely peer reviews. That's what we're all about within the school psych review context. Although many of these strategies and information that we'll be sharing are also relevant to your work with other journals as well. Some of it will be particular to the school psych review context, but you can use this and apply this information across many journals and such. All right, so just brief introduction, looking at the cast of characters here, I recognize a lot of the names, and good to see each of you this morning. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Shane Jimerson, a professor at the University of California here in Santa Barbara, and currently I'm editor-elect of School Psych Review. During the past 25 years, I've done a lot of publishing. I've also got a lot of experiences for more than 20 years as editor, as associate editor of various journals, and also having edited 12 books, literally thousands of manuscripts that I've edited, some of those manuscripts multiple times over the years. So I'm bringing that experience and that perspective to the information I'll be sharing today. And then also 22 years of extensive experience as I've advocated for advancing the science, practice, and policy relevant to school psychology. And then there's just an assortment of different associations down there that I've been particularly involved in over the years. And as many of you learning to do the peer reviews or continuing to do peer reviews, that's tremendous contribution of service to the profession. So including NASP Division 16, as well as ISPA, APA, CASP, AERA, and the Society for the Study of School Psychology as well. So that's a little bit about me. But I also want to highlight the incredibly talented and distinguished SPR leadership team who is involved this year. And so you can see here, we've got Frank Worrell at the University of California, who's one of the senior editors. We've got Tyler Renshaw at Utah State University, an associate editor. Sam Song over there at the University of Nevada as an associate editor. Amanda Sullivan up at the University of Minnesota is another senior editor. Francis Wong over at University of Missouri as an associate editor. Jamelia Blake down at University of Texas A&M as a senior editor. Gary Keneve as a senior editor at the Eastern Illinois University. Then we've got Jorge Gonzalez, another senior editor at the University of Houston. Scott Graves up there at the Ohio State University, associate editor. Dorothy Espalash, who's now at the University of North Carolina as a senior editor. Stacey Ann January, who's associate editor down at the University of South Florida. Perna Aurora, who's at Teachers College, Columbia University, is another associate editor. And then Xizhen Wang is associate editor who's a professor at the University of Maryland. So I want to introduce each of them, partially because they're critical to the success of the School Psych Review Journal. And they've also reviewed the materials and contributed to the materials that we've developed that are the guidelines for SPR reviewers. So I want to acknowledge them, express gratitude and appreciation. And it's also good for reviewers to understand some of the other various action editors who you'll be communicating with over the upcoming years. Okay. Then in terms of our agenda today, I want to cover briefly these topics, provide perspective, describe briefly the process of peer review, share a little bit about preparation, highlight some key review questions, and then briefly touch upon preparing the report. And my intent is to preserve time for question and answers. You're welcome to put comments in the chat for those of you that arrived just a little bit later. Jamie, Kirby, Ryan, they'll be taking a look at questions that are popping up in the chat, and we can pause on occasion. Okay, so with that, let's go ahead and proceed. Let's jump in. Let's start with providing perspective regarding the benefits of peer review. So clearly, each of you are providing important contributions to advancing science, both in terms of helping to identify and select which particular articles are appropriate for publication in the journal, but also helping to refine and enhance particular articles as they go through the peer review process, such that when they are published, the readers of the journal are actually getting the best information that's available, because you've asked the good questions in the process and given that feedback to the authors to ask them for revisions and such. So the contributions to advancing science are critically important and a benefit of the peer review process. But also in terms of what's in it for you, for instance, you have access to scholarship way before it's published. And that's important in the sense that, as we know with many of these timelines, it might be a year or even 2 years, depending on how long the revisions take and then how long the publication queue is. So you have access to scholarship way before it's published, and some of it, of course, won't even be published. But it also gives you an opportunity through reviewing manuscripts to refine your own scholarship. You're learning about the method, you're learning about the measures, you're learning about the design, you're learning about the way that individuals are conceptualizing their projects. And so there's an opportunity for you to incorporate that information based on you reviewing those manuscripts into your own scholarship, which should improve and benefit your own personal scholarship. And then finally, I'd highlight that it's an opportunity to enhance your writing skills. And What I mean by that is as you're reviewing information in an abstract, in the introduction, the research questions, the methods, the procedures, the results, analyses, the discussion, conclusions, and such, looking at those tables and figures, you'll see some things that are really great, and hopefully you'll incorporate that into your writing skills, and you'll see some things that are not so good. And so hopefully then you'll say, oh, I definitely don't want to do that, right? So there's a tremendous opportunity for enhancing your writing skills. And I will say that as you complete your reviews and then you have other colleagues who are also completing their reviews, you'll be able to ultimately see what the decision letter from the action editor is. And you'll also be able to see those other peer reviews that are included. Each of them are anonymous, right? Reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3, so on. But importantly, I know for me, as I began reviewing manuscripts in graduate school and then through early career, even now, I am super excited when I submit a manuscript. I'm always super excited to see what the other reviewers had noted. And sometimes I see things that I wish I would have caught. And sometimes I see things that are taking it from a different perspective. Sometimes it's a different view on the same item. And then there's some things where I'll say, oh, I saw that, but they didn't see that, or that sort of thing. So you can really learn a lot through the experience and the process. Okay, so those are some of the benefits of peer review. I remember seeing this when I was in graduate school, I think was the first time I saw it. So those of you who can't read the writing there, it says, most scientists regarded the new streamlined peer review process as quite an improvement, right? So as you look at that, I think for some folks, especially when you're in graduate school or as an early career scholar, you approach this with some trepidation. And it seems almost like you have to run the rally here to get your paper accepted, right? So in part, this is meant to be funny, but it's also providing perspective in the sense that some folks kind of fear the peer review process. And now each of you, hopefully through learning a bit more about the peer review process, that will help. As often we fear the unknown, but as you become more knowledgeable and more experienced, it helps make it more manageable and understandable. So in some ways, it's just meant to be funny, but it's also meant to understand that there are many colleagues who are face it with some trepidation. This is the overview of the process just in broad strokes as the new submission comes in. I review every manuscript initially as an editor-elect. And initially, if a manuscript doesn't appear to be a good fit or has some technical challenges that are just blatantly obvious and such, then I'll do a desk reject at that point. That could be anywhere between 30 and 50% of the manuscripts, depending upon the season and the journal and such. And then as I identify an optimal action editor to then move forward, they could also take a look at that manuscript and then indicate that, no, this isn't good to send out to our peer review board members, okay? So there's somewhere between 20 to 50% of manuscripts you might not even see as a editorial board member, right? Those get rejected and we write them a nice correspondence to let them know why we didn't see it as a good fit with the journal. Then the role that each of you are particularly interested in who are engaged in the peer review process is this external peer review. And some of those manuscripts might be, you might recommend rejection, you might reject revision, you might recommend acceptance, and then that will go back to the action editor. The action editor will develop a decision, and ultimately, if it's revised, resubmit. As a reviewer, you'll have an opportunity to look at that manuscript again. That's an important point to understand, is that when a revised manuscript is resubmitted to the journal, you'll be receiving an invitation to provide another review of that revised manuscript, which will include the author's comments as related to the items that were noted in the previous round of reviews, right? And that process could go on for revision 1, revision 2, possibly revision 3. Hopefully that's enough, maybe revision 4. But in general, we try to get these done as in a timely manner and as promptly and efficiently as possible. And then ultimately through the acceptance, then it goes into the online first system that's typically prepared within about 30 days of actual acceptance and receiving the manuscript. And then ultimately it gets placed into the queue to be featured in an issue of the journal. So that's just in broad strokes what happens from the point where someone provides the submission to the point where it is featured maybe a year, maybe 2 years later, actually in an issue of the journal. Those of you that are interested can go through the Taylor and Francis they detail the peer review process. You can check that out online. Okay. And then in the school psych review context in particular, we focus on high quality, timely peer review processes, right? And the timely piece is this SPR, expedited peer review, a 1-month timeline. And each of our editorial board members have committed to this as reviewers to complete their reviews within that 14-day period. So ultimately, that means that we can make decisions from the time of submission to the first decision within 30 days, okay? Now, as you look at the process, I sort of described this previously, but the staff member needs a couple of days to go through and make sure that the file contents are included. They should be blinded and ready for review and all that sort of thing. So that happens within the first 48 to 72 hours. Then as an editor, I'm going to review that. That typically happens over the course of 2 or 3 days. Again, 48, 72 hours. I'm reviewing those and seeing whether there's a good fit or whether to reject. Then the action editors have an opportunity, as they are invited to serve with that particular, as the action editor for that particular manuscript. They're going to review it as well to check for goodness of fit and to identify optimal peer review colleagues out there to invite. Once they send out the invitations, this is the key piece, especially for our discussion today in terms of the peer review process, that if you're available and interested, then the peer will accept that particular invitation to review. And if they accept it, then they'll complete the review process, submit their online ratings and their recommendation and such. Once we have the requisite number of reviews in hand, which in general we're targeting 3, that then the action editor will have an opportunity to take a look at each of those items and craft the decision letter, the decision correspondence that we're basing on them needing, 4 to 7 days, depending on where it falls. Obviously, if all of that's finished on a Thursday, well, then it could well be the next early next week by the time action editor has an opportunity to take care of that decision letter. Then it pops over to me as the editor, and I take a couple of days to look at it to see if everything's in check, and then forward that. So if you do the math there, that all adds up to less than the 30 days. Okay, so that's a bit about the timeline and the process that'll be helpful just to keep everyone oriented. And, jumping ahead there. So in terms of the timing, when you receive the invitation to review a manuscript, immediately determine whether or not you can complete the review within the next 14-day period, okay? So what we found over time, well, for one, we understand that there's 86,400 seconds each day, right? So we all have the same amount of time allocated. And it turns out we're better at knowing what our schedule is going to be in the next few days and the next few weeks than the next few months. So having managed, again, thousands of manuscripts through various online management systems, I can tell you that basically having a group of peer review colleagues is the most important, critically important component of the entire process. So I want to highlight that. And we need those high quality reviews, but also highlighting that your schedule in the next 2 weeks. If you know that you're available to do that review, which on average, based on my discussions with other colleagues, a lot of experienced colleagues say that it takes them about 2 to 2.5 hours to complete a high quality review of a manuscript. The manuscript, if it's say on average 25 to 35 pages. And some spend a little longer, some spend a little less. And especially when you're beginning, it could take twice that long. So maybe you'd want to budget, 3 hours, 5 hours within those next couple of weeks. And of course, for the student editorial board members, it'll be important to try to complete that review as promptly as possible so that then you can also engage and consult with your mentor about your summary report and such. So again, if you're available, then you accept the invitation. And if you're not, then you decline the invitation. And again, we're inviting multiple peers to review, multiple members of the editorial board. So it's understood that you're not always going to be available. But when you are available in the next 2 weeks and the topic appears to be a good fit. Now, just so you know, we're using the classification matches in order to identify which reviewers appear to be optimal for each manuscript. that's important to know, because in Scholar One, you have an opportunity to identify from about 150 areas of expertise, which areas that you have that competency and which areas you're most excited about to review manuscripts. And so again, that's important because you control that. We don't set that for you. You adjust those settings in Scholar One. So again, if you have 27 areas of expertise, you would anticipate you might receive more invitations than when you only have identified 2 or 3. I think it might force you to identify at least 3. So, okay, so that's a little bit about the timing. Then briefly on the ethics, important component in terms of thinking about real or perceived conflicts of interest, right? Or competing interests. So a competing interest is anything that interferes with or could reasonably be perceived as interfering with the full and objective peer review. So competing interests could be financial, non-financial, professional, personal, lots of possibilities. If when you receive a manuscript, it should be blinded, but you might still know because it happens to be a member of the research lab that you had just worked with, or it happens to be obviously from a colleague down the hallway because you know their series of research. If it emerges that you've been invited to review such a manuscript and you see a real or potential conflict of interest, then all you need to do is drop a quick email to me and we'll sort it out. Sometimes we just reassign it when we don't have you review it. But in some instances, depending on the context of like, oh, this is somebody that perhaps you knew in graduate school, but you're not close as colleagues, but you're sensing that it's their work, then maybe in those instances, it would be fine. But we'll have those discussions. And COPE has ethical guidelines for reviewers that provide a lot of great information. So encourage you to take care of that. Okay. All right. So considering the ethics, and then at this point, wanted to do a quick check-in if we can. Let's see. So let's see if folks can see this. All right, let's do a quick check-in for pace and clarity and see if there are any questions to triage at this juncture, given that I've been sharing lots of information with you. Let's see what we got here. Thanks everybody for jumping in there. Okay, beautiful. All right. And if there's any questions right there, Jamie or Kirby, Ryan, that you think I should address, let me know.
I think we're good for right now. I'll keep an eye on things.
Okay.
Yeah, there's none right now.
Okay, thank you. And so far, just so you can see how we're tracking, 96% just right. 3 of you would like me to go a little more rapidly, which is totally my default. And then at this point, it looks like the information's presented is totally clear. All right, and 2 are a bit confusing, but pop in little questions.
I have a question.
Perfect.
This isn't, I'm reading it, someone sent it to me.
Yep.
For in blinded submissions, do we see the funding source?
That's an excellent question. And there are instances, yes, where that information will be included. Again, it depends on how authors format their manuscripts when they submit it, but it would be common to see in funding sources as a note that would be in there, but not always. Sometimes they just put it in the cover letter, but that's a great question. But again, it's a double-blind peer review process where in general, the reviewers don't know who the authors are and the authors don't know who the reviewers are, okay? All right. All right, so we'll keep marching on then, cover a bit more information, some pro tips. So when you first receive that manuscript and you're taking a look and you read through it for the first time, here's some basic things to consider. Is, is the relevant literature reviewed? Wait, did I cover the, I feel like it jumped over. No. Okay. Oh, I wanted to also highlight, it did jump over this. Let me just go back to this for a moment. So we presented the peer review guidelines for the school psych review editorial board members and student editorial board members. We also provided the Nature Masterclass for, in particular, the student editorial board members, but really everybody could take advantage of that. If you're new to reviewing or if you're early career colleague, you might want to check that out. Here, I can put up that poll real quick just to see how many of you have already completed that Nature Masterclass on peer review. Let's just see if that pops up. Yeah. Okay. Wow, it's going quick there. That's good. So we got 53. Okay. So about 35, about 33% have so far, about 33% not yet. Okay, so that's good. You're able to see if you want to check that out real quick. And some folks have done other trainings as well. So again, I just realized that when I was clicking through the buttons, it must have skipped this. Really great resource for online training. And it does cover some of the information that's included in the pro tips. Including information about your role as a peer reviewer, the peer review report, the ethics. It goes more into that. Overall, it takes about 3.5 hours, although you can finish it a little bit more promptly if you're not watching the full videos, but reading the transcript. So check that out as a resource, the Nature Masterclass, and it looks like about a third of the folks on here have already done that. So again, my apologies as I see that it skipped forward past that one. And let me go ahead and get back up to where we were. Okay, so as you are going through the process and you review that paper for the first time, read through it, consider things such as the items that I've noted here. Is the relevant literature reviewed, right? Is it contemporary? Does it have the stellar seminal pieces included in there? Are the conceptual foundations delineated, right? Does it have a theoretical basis, the conceptual foundations clearly articulated? Are the research questions clearly articulated? Is it very evident as to what this study is or paper is to address? Is the design of the study appropriate to address the questions, right? Are there any fundamental flaws in the study design? You want to look for that. Are all the conclusions supported by the data, right? Sometimes authors will pontificate about their ideas and insights, but the data in their study doesn't necessarily support that. It's just that they would like to offer that. So you want to look closely at that. Are the unique contributions of the study clear? Okay. And then is the content of the study appropriate for the journal? Again, many of you know the field of school psychology, the readers were also looking for interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary contributions. So each of you will gain further clarity on that. Hopefully the editors, each of the action editors are also attending to that, but we certainly value your perspective as reviewers as to whether this study is appropriate for the journal. And then who would be interested in reading this study, right? Is it mostly focused on people who are doing science and scholarship, or do you think that practitioners would be interested, possibly policymakers? Again, I want to take this time to highlight that School Psychology Review really does aim to advance the science as well as the practice and policy relevant to the field of school psychology. So it would be great if most of our manuscripts were able to make those linkages and articulate the implications for the practice of school psychology. And even better, if we have more contributions that are able to advance and inform the policy work, right? So advancing and informing practice and policy, and then also certainly advancing the science and knowledge of this as well. Okay, as we keep going here, so in terms of reviewing the abstract, what I tried to do is extract 3 key questions for each component. Now, in our reviewer guidelines, there's numerous questions, sometimes 5, sometimes 7. You can use that as a guide, especially early on. But just to kind of talk you through this and get you oriented, I wanted to highlight 3 key questions for each component. So, for instance, what questions does this paper address? That needs to be featured in the abstract, right? And what methods were used and who participated? You need to know that in the abstract. And then, so what? So does this advance science? Does this advance practice? Does this advance policy? There ought to be some information about this specifically right there, articulated front and center in the abstract, okay? And it's important to note that presently the SPR abstract guidelines, the guidelines for submission for authors is limiting abstracts to 150 words. So authors need to do this succinctly, but then also clearly articulate these key components. So again, that's important. There's always this balance between reviewers wanting more information, but also authors attending to the guidelines that are suggesting that there's, you know, word limits and page limits and that sort of thing. So we want to be sensitive to that as reviewers. Okay, in terms of reviewing the introduction, 3 key questions must be answered here. Does it accurately describe the relevant contemporary research with properly referenced statements. That's a key component as you go through the first few paragraphs and the next few pages of the introduction, right? Appropriate, relevant, contemporary research, and having statements that are properly referenced, right? They don't need to have 7 references or citations for a particular sentence, right? Oftentimes 2 is enough. In fact, if you got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, you got to wonder why we need that many, right? Aren't there like a seminal piece and a most contemporary piece, and those are the best? So that's going to have implications for the length of a manuscript, for instance. So you do want to be aware of it. So properly referenced means that there is a citation that is appropriate for that particular statement, but it doesn't mean that more is better, okay? Also, does it clearly set up why the study was necessary? So in reading the introduction, by the time you get to the questions, it ought to be blatantly obvious what those questions are going to be. Because if the introduction is covering X, Y, and Z, and then the questions are about A, B, and C, then there's a disconnect. So basically, the introduction should clearly set up why this study was necessary. Gaps in the literature, or advancing further knowledge, or unique populations, all of these would be important. And then finally, in the introduction, do the citations included adequately reflect the current state of the science in the field? So that you want it to be contemporary, not just citing a lot of citations from the 1970s, for instance, but also having some contemporary, especially contemporary citations reflecting the current state of the science. Okay. So that's with the introduction. Then in terms of the methods, is the methodology described in sufficient detail? Can you understand the sampling, the participants, whether there were controls, what were the measures used, what were the outcomes? All of these are critically important. So you want to know that the methodology is described in sufficient detail. Are there instruments and/or techniques are they sound, right? And then also, are the analytical procedures sound for the purposes of that particular study? So again, it depends on if it's a qualitative study, quantitative study, systematic, peer review, meta-analyses. You'll have to look at that relative to the design of the particular study and the purpose of the study. In terms of the results in the discussion, here's the 3 key questions. Are the results well organized and presented clearly? It's always great when the results are presented in a manner consistent with the questions that were asked, because that way you're not fishing for the results and information to try to figure out what do these data have to do with these questions that were answered. So the structure and the scaffolding of the use of headers and such is very valuable, but what you're trying to find out is it well organized and are they presented clearly? Then, do the authors discuss the results in the context of published studies? So as you're looking at that discussion section, you're also trying to get a sense of their findings from this study relative to other published studies. And then, is the discussion reasonable considering the design of the study? So I mentioned, for instance, correlation does not equal causation. You want to look at the way that the authors are phrasing their conclusions, and sometimes they kind of trend towards over-interpreting or perhaps over-declaring the significance. And it's fine for there to be an association, but it doesn't necessarily mean that just because you have that correlation, basically all interventions ought to focus on that one particular element. Notably, you only focused on that one particular element in this study. It doesn't account for the other 17 potential variables, right? So you want to be thoughtful about whether or not this discussion reasonably, whether it's reasonable considering the design of the study. Okay. And then in terms of taking a look at reviewing the conclusions, do the conclusions answer the research questions? That's a key component, right? You want to see that linkage again across. You should see research questions clearly articulated. Then in the results and discussion, you should see the authors responding to those research questions. And then in the conclusions, we should be seeing information specifically related to those research questions. There are instances where authors will go well beyond the scope of what their questions were, and they'll start talking about all sorts of other stuff. And if it's framed appropriately, that could be okay. But in general, you're wanting them to stick to the data they have, the questions they asked, and really focus on that. Also, is the conclusion supported by the results, or are there alternative explanations for the results, right? And so sometimes authors get so caught up in their view of what their understanding of it is that they're not necessarily considering alternative explanations and such. So they're sort of declaring it to be so, but you might think of other possible explanations. And those would be some of the types of comments that you could raise in your peer review report, for instance, asking them to consider other possibilities. That's often very helpful. And then, do the authors clearly explain the implications of the study for the field? Again, SPR is all about advancing science, advancing practice, and advancing policy. And you want to see, did the authors clearly articulate the implications for any or all of these? This is going to be very important, and we'll rely upon our peer review colleagues, our editorial board members, as well as our action editors to be certain that we're featuring authors describing the implications of the study for the field of school psychology. Okay, again, welcoming interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary work, absolutely, but we want to see what the implications are. So that's the reviewing of the conclusions. Just in brief, reviewing tables and figures here. I'll just mention that 3 quick questions, key questions. Are they clearly delineated? A table ought to be able to stand on its own. Even without the journal article, you should be able to pick up that table and recognize what it is, what it means, and it should be transparent. So it should be able to stand on its own. Are they helpful? Or is it just redundant with the information? Would it be actually easier to present the information in the text because it would take up less space, right? So is it helpful? And also, is it necessary? So tables take up a lot of space in journals in general, but also maybe it could be supplementary materials. Like sometimes someone might want to submit 8 or 10 tables and figures, of which maybe 2 or 3 are necessary and ought to be in the actual published version. But we can also have tables and figures and other information included in supplementary online materials. They're still linked to the manuscript when it's published. It's just that instead of that manuscript ending up being 57 or 80 pages, that instead you've got your nice tight 20-page manuscript, and then you can link to supplementary questions. Okay, so let me, I got one more here for figures, and then we'll take a pause for a moment, check in. So 3 key questions, they're the same. Are they clearly delineated, the figures? Are they helpful? And are they necessary? Or whether they should be supplementary. And again, you're looking for that clarity where even if you didn't read the manuscript, you could look at this figure and understand what it represents and understand the data. And you could, you don't necessarily understand the implications of it, but it ought to be transparent and clear as an actual figure. Okay, so with that, let me check in real quick to see how folks are going, and then how folks are doing, and then we'll keep marching on. We can also answer some questions. Okay, so Kirby, you got some questions, or Jamie, I think you said you did.
I have one that came up in the conversation around early career psychologists or graduate students identifying their own area of expertise, or as Charles and Sam pointed out, area of interest, so they can identify what type of articles they should be reviewing, particularly because they're early off in their career.
Yeah, that's excellent. So for one, graduate students often have even broader expertise than many faculty because they're immersed in like programs that are NASP accredited, APA accredited, where you're getting the breadth of foundational knowledge. So in that sense, it's your areas of interest, the areas that you would consider that you would like to both continue to learn more about, as well as you feel like you're developing some competency. But in terms of like an expertise, like of considering yourself, especially like graduate student, early career scholar, you might not consider yourself like the expert in that area, but more so that you have a passion and commitment and you would like to review manuscripts submitted in that area. Yeah, that's a great question. Yep. Jamie, did you have another one?
Yeah. If you're in having a training grant through NIH, is there a conflict of interest if a submission is also funded by one or the other institutes?
That's a good point. And I will say in brief, if it comes up, touch base with the editor and kind of walk through it and get a sense rather than a black and white yes or no. It's really that we need to consider the details and consider what the relationships are. So that's a great question. I love it that you're thinking about those ethical considerations and those possible real or perceived conflicts of interest, right? Yeah.
And
Any other ones? Any other
one
ones?
more.
Great.
I have seen other reviewers critiquing repetition in introductions and discussions. How should writers emphasize in discussion without necessarily sounding like repetitious?
Excellent question. Yeah, there's precious few pages in all of our journals, right? And so we're trying to have the authors be succinct and avoid redundancy. And so basically, if you're finding that they're just repeating the same information in the intro and the discussion, then you could provide some guidance to be more specific and more clear about getting the information at the front end to set up the situation, then providing the information in the discussion to actually report out on the implications of that. So I could see where there might be a little bit of like overlap, but it certainly should not be a lot of redundancy, because the introduction is just different than the discussion in terms of the information that should be highlighted and emphasized. That's a great question. I see that in the poll, we have 73 who have already responded, and this is how it's going so far. It's 96% just right, and 100% totally clear. All right, beautiful. All right, is it okay if I keep going then, Jamie, Kirby?
Yes.
All right, so preparing the report, 3 key considerations, okay? The tone, the structure, and the content. So let me just briefly highlight this, and then we'll have time for some more questions here at the end. Be kind whenever possible. It is always possible, right? The Dalai Lama, there's an inspiring fella. So think about this. On most manuscripts, there will be a student author included. On many manuscripts, there will be an early career colleague included. In some instances on these manuscripts, the first author is a student. The first author is an early career scholar. And in some instances, this is the first manuscript that they've ever submitted as first author. If you keep this in mind as you're preparing the written feedback and your comments, it's tremendously valuable, because you can understand that when someone new to the system is kind of like, back to that cartoon image, kind of getting beat up verbally through the process, it's not encouraging, it's not inspiring, it's not making them better as a scholar. And there's always a way to say it that you can still bring up the same point, but state it in a constructive means. So again, if you can remember that there's likely a student who's a co-author or possibly the first author to help temper your statements, if you can think that there might be an early career scholar who this is the first manuscript they've submitted as a solo author, if you can think of the Dalai Lama just in general as a default, be kind whenever possible. And it is always possible, right? So it doesn't mean that you're just forgiving that you have to go light on concerns or feedback. It's just the manner in which we are providing it. So this is a very first touchstone in terms of the tone, okay? So to be clear in the general guidelines in preparing the report, be constructive, be objective, be clear, be transparent, be respectful, be organized in your feedback, and importantly, be succinct. Because if your review goes on for 7 pages, then the authors are having to respond to all of this. Oftentimes your review would be 1 page, maybe 2, but a page and a half. Okay, so keep these things in mind. In terms of the structure of the report that you're going to prepare and submit, you can see that the PLOS peer review template is offered at that link down there. But I just highlight 3 areas of how to provide your feedback. The first is a brief summary paragraph of the research and your overall impression of it. The second is separate into the major and minor points that are providing evidence and examples. And then finally, any other miscellaneous remarks, okay? So let me detail that a little bit further so you know what the content would be. So the brief summary, that's 1 paragraph that opens up your peer review report. You want to identify the study's key objectives as you understand them. Hopefully they're very obvious because the authors did a good job of articulating it. But if not, you take your best effort to say what you understood the study's key objectives to be. Describe the sample and technical rigor of the study as you view it, and then identify the key findings and their contributions. By you doing that in the first paragraph, it helps to convey to the author that this is your understanding of what they submitted and the paper that they wrote. It also helps the action editor to take a look at what your understanding of it is, because they might have some other ideas about what the contributions might be or you might share some unique novel perspectives on that. So that would be that just brief first paragraph. Again, maybe it's 3, 5, 7 sentences. It's brief. In terms of the major comments, here you want to include your significant concerns. So this could include things such as a problem with the study design, insufficient data, improper referencing, unaddressed limitations, those major comments. These are things that when the authors receive the feedback and the action editors review your peer review report, they are going to be focused on these items to say, how big of a deal are these? These major comments might be the grounds for rejecting the manuscript and not asking to resubmit, right? Reject, no resubmission encouraged. It might be the grounds for revise and resubmit, where you want them to address these major concerns, but you're asking them to revise and then resubmit, right? Or it could be a basis for saying, yep, fantastic, great, perfect, and tentatively accept the manuscript, right? Then you'll have a brief section for minor comments, smaller points, improvements to clarify, minor errors and such. Again, don't worry so much about copy editing and dealing with all punctuation and such. There's like paid professionals at these publishing houses. They're copy editors. That's their job. They'll do a great job with that. What we want you to focus on is the substance, the design, the methods, the measures, the implications. Don't get caught up in every detail. You can point out if it's egregious that the authors should be attending to APA style format. That's enough. You don't have to then explain the entire APA style format to them. Okay, but note at the bottom, do not state your recommendation regarding publication within your review. You want to save that information for the confidential comments to the editors. This is important because if you place it in your review, then if everybody does that, some people might be saying, yeah, accept, and some people would be saying reject, and other people are saying revise and resubmit. But the authors don't necessarily need to know precisely what your disposition was, as long as they have your review of the information. The action editor will take that information that you provide and then use it to inform the decision, because there's plenty of instances where not all 3 reviewers have the same perspective regarding recommendation on publication at that juncture. So I want to highlight that point. And again, highlight it in terms of the confidential comments to the editors. Here's a great place to share any comments regarding your recommendation for the manuscript. So for instance, you can say the 3 key reasons I recommended accept are 1, 2, 3. Or you could say the 3 key reasons I recommended reject or revise and resubmit are, and then you just delineate that right there. Now, again, sometimes you copy paste from the note that you wrote to the author because you don't want to spend a whole bunch more time writing a whole nother letter to the private, confidential comments to the editors. But this would be the place to locate your recommendation. You're going to have to click a button that's in the portal suggesting reject, revise, resubmit, and or tentatively accept. So that's a little bit of information. Those comments are not viewed by the authors, okay? And I see we're getting there. So there's some resources here. I'll just mention these just so you see them. Masterclass in peer review, a third of the students have already done that. The Public Library of Science offers a great reviewer resource center as well. And then the Publons Academy has a free course there. And COPE's Ethical Guidelines for Reviewers. I encourage everybody to check those out as well. So we can end up posting these in Facebook and on Twitter and sharing that information. So with that, we still have a few minutes for folks that would like to ask questions and see what we've got there. Jamie and Kirby?
I have one more for you.
Yeah, great.
What if you review an article and you find out that you do not consider yourself to have expertise in that particular statistical method? Should you make a note of that, or what would be best practice?
That's an excellent point. And I'll highlight a couple of things here. One is, so you know, on the School Psych Review editorial board, we have about 40 colleagues who are specifically committed to reviewing the analyses and the methods, whether they be statistical or quantitative or whatever, qualitative, whatever they are. And so realize that we're always going to be inviting at least one colleague with specific expertise. And that colleague may not even really care so much about the content of what the topic is and the features. That's their lane in particular. So the good news is, if you have expertise about the content, you can comment on those portions. And if you do not have expertise in the actual analyses, right, then you can also acknowledge that within your review. But the intent is that because we're inviting multiple reviewers, there's opportunities for those who have the content knowledge to contribute. Sometimes they'll also have the analytical knowledge and be able to contribute. And there's also opportunities for those with statistical knowledge and methods to contribute in particular. So hopefully that's helpful to be thinking about, okay? Other questions, Jamie or Kirby?
At SPR, do reviewers get to see other reviewers' reports?
Yes, so at the end of the process, when the decision letter is completed, we will be appending the other reviewers' comments. You won't be able to identify them by name, but you will be able to identify them by reviewer 1, 2, or 3. Yes. Any other questions?
That's all I have.
All right, I'm going to launch this poll to get a sense of whether you gained some knowledge or insight regarding any of these topics today. And let me see. So there we are. Okay. So we've got lots of folks responding there. Any other questions popping up, Jamie or Kirby?
Not right now. I think folks are sharing that this was helpful and that they really appreciated the information that was shared. They're also looking forward to those links being released on Twitter and Facebook so they can follow up with some of your recommendations.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Yeah. And again, if you're active on Facebook or Twitter, encourage you to share information on social media, both about the School Psych Review as well as your recent experience in receiving the pro tips for preparing constructive, high quality, and timely peer reviews. We'll hold more sessions in the future, really try to facilitate having SPR community, both as editorial board members and colleagues and such. The next event will actually be next Tuesday. We're doing a special topic on school violence and school safety. Dr. Matthew Mayer and Dr. Amanda Nickerson will join us to talk about that topic. And that will be the upcoming special topic section featured in School Psych Review. And then we'll also have another one right at the end of May that's going to focus on preparing manuscripts for submission to School Psychology Review, where it sort of walk you through some of the key considerations for authors, okay? So thank you, everyone, and really great to see you. And in the spirit of time, with 86,400 seconds each day, we've already preserved an extra 120 seconds that you can go out and make the most of as we've ended a couple of minutes early, all right? So take care, everyone. Thank you so much for your contributions, participation. I look forward to further communications via email, Zoom, Twitter, Facebook. Be in touch, all right? All right, so I think that's it. I can end the poll, and lots of folks found good information that they took away from today. There you go. All right. How is that? Yep. Okay. Fantastic. Good to see you guys. Good to see you. Yeah. Thanks, Chun. Good to see you, Chris. Good to see you, Corey. Hiroko. Good to see you. See you, folks. Great to see you, Matt. Take care, man. All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Megan. Great to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
This is
Good
really
to see you,
great.
Chia. Good
Wow.
to see you, Caitlin.
Very energizing.
Ah, thank you, Chia. You're the best.
Oh, gee, it's so good to see you. Hear your voice.
Good to see you, Wes. Good to see you, Yui. Take care, Nick. All right. Yes. Very good. Good to see you. All right. I don't know if Kirby, yeah, Jamie's still on. Jamie, should I go ahead and end that and then?
Yeah, that's all
Okay.
good. Yeah, I think that went great. So
Let me,
bye.
I need to do the video piece.
Yeah, go ahead and you can pause, stop the recording there.